my kids came to me and their friends in the community, and they said, Mom, we really appreciate that our rights are preserved by the Second Amendment, but our friend is dead.
Hey gang, I was at my local gun shop the other day picking up a little EDC, a little micro 9mm the other day, and I had a glimpse at the ammo prices, and it's nuts how expensive ammunition is these days. That's why Mantis Firearms Training System is a longtime sponsor of Active Self-Protection. We're so grateful for them and for their product. Getting immediate, measurable visual feedback can take so much time out of the learning curve of dry fire, and this product is worth every penny. It's so inexpensive for what you get. What gets measured gets improved, and this helps you measure every aspect of dry and live fire. Visit them at mantis.com and let them know you heard about them on the ASP podcast. All right, folks, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am your host, Mike Williver, your favorite former Fed. With us today, Sarah Albrecht. She is the founder and executive director of holdmyguns.org, and we're going to talk about what that is exactly here coming up. She is married to the person she describes as the most ruggedly handsome man in the universe, Tom. She has 5 kids, and she is located in Pennsylvania, as is holdmyguns.org is based out of Pennsylvania, not far from where I grew up. We're going to discuss the organization in some detail here coming up, but let's talk about you for a second. Did you grow up in the East Coast, Pennsylvania area? Is that where you're from originally?
I am. I'm from Pennsylvania originally, and my parents moved around a little bit, and then I moved back to Pennsylvania and got married. So we have raised our 5 kids here, and we've also done some overseas traveling as well. So it's exciting that my kids have been able to see what it's like to live in Japan for a couple of years. And I just always appreciate the opportunity to meet new people and appreciate new cultures. And it really helps to give us a broader perspective for everyday life.
And I find that traveling overseas, even to nice places, does give you an appreciation for what we have here. If you've never been to Nicaragua or Kenya or anywhere else in the world, it doesn't have it as good as we do. You get back here, you're like, man, as nice as Japan is, I'm still glad I live here and not there. So, growing up, did you and your family have guns around the house? Did you grow up in a gun culture, or tell us about that?
Yes. So my dad is a Vietnam veteran. He served in the Marine Corps, and firearms have always been a part of our life, both having a respect for them from a safety perspective, to understanding the importance of preserving rights and what it means to be a gun owner. And so we've always just had firearms around growing up, and I really appreciate that. My dad would like set up little tin cans in the backyard, and we do target practice, or we kind of lived on this little farmette, so sometimes we would take out raccoons and possums. One time I killed a rabid possum. That was quite an ordeal, that just didn't want to die. But we got him. And, we just had like chickens and stuff. So we had to protect, to be able to have our chickens and eggs and things like that. And I've passed that on to my children. I'm a range safety officer, and I volunteer at the Southern Chester County Youth Shooting League. And my kids, some of them are no longer in it, but now we are, as they've aged out. But we have a distinguished expert, 2 experts, and 2 sharpshooters. So it's just been a wonderful thing to pass that skill and legacy on to my own children.
That's outstanding. As an aside, anyone who knows me would know that Rabid Possum is the name of my new band. That notwithstanding, so I guess I ask you those questions to kind of establish your bona fides, if you will, is being a pro-gun person, being a pro-Second Amendment person. I think one might, in passing, look at an organization like holdmyguns.org and think, oh, it's probably, low-key, probably an anti-gun place, or, trying to demonize firearms for firearms' sake. And that's definitely not the case here. Could you just quickly walk us through? There was an incident that happened with someone someone your kids know, that led to the spark for the idea for this. You want to talk to us about that?
Sure. So in 2018, we lost an 18-year-old friend to suicide by firearm. And my kids came to me and their friends in the community, and they said, Mom, we really appreciate that our rights are preserved by the Second Amendment, but our friend is dead. So how do we help when there's a situation where someone in the home might be suffering from um, some mental health concerns, and maybe they don't have a friend or family member that they're aware of, or it's not lawful to store a firearm with somebody else. How can we help people so that they can just take a break from having that in their home and to go get help? And as I looked into it, I realized that, here in Pennsylvania, there are some laws. You have to have a concealed carry permit, for example, to safe keep someone's pistol. It's not the same with a rifle, but as I looked into it more, I realized that there were a lot of prohibitive state laws that are infringements that, in a situation like this can actually create an obstacle. And I realized that even when there are friends and family members who are lawfully able to store a firearm, it doesn't mean that they have a firearm safe. So, if they have like a 2-year-old that has access to that firearm, it could create an even bigger problem. And then people might have a firearm safe. They might be lawfully able to store a firearm for you, but maybe they're a gossip. And so, all of a sudden you're out with your friends and they're like, hey, I'm storing Sarah's firearms. And then it's like record scratch, and really embarrassing. So we really sought to, in exploring how to do this, I sought the help of Joshua Prince. He's a phenomenal firearms attorney here in Pennsylvania, and a pro rights advocate. And he really helped us to create a system that protects people's privacy and reduces liability to our gun shop partners. So I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm also just always moved to hear stories of people who have stored firearms with us, and how they're still alive today, and also even how our messaging, and we really make it a point to emphasize the protective factors in the firearms community and to bring hope and to create a world that people want to wake up to. We are just moved by how that messaging has even helped people to realize that they have options and that the firearms community really does care about them.
I think it's critical to point out that anyone listening to this right now, whether you realize it or not, anyone can find themselves in a moment of crisis. Anyone can find themselves in a bad spot. I mean, I've suffered from depression and anxiety in the past. I've been in a bad place. I was a police officer. I had ready access to firearms, and the thought has crossed my mind. This has been a long time ago, a long time ago. But if you think it can't happen to you, I'm sorry to tell you that you're wrong. It can. It can happen to absolutely anybody. It could be a factor of just brain chemistry, or it could be situational, where things just kind of spiral and go downhill quickly, and you don't see it coming. And that's why this organization is here. So walk us through. Let's say I find myself having some bad thoughts, thinking about self-harm, and I want to reach out. How does the process work? How does somebody find a location? How do they get a hold? Obviously, they go to holdmyguns.org, but then what happens?
You would go to holdmyguns.org and you would look up to find a location near you. And what you would do is bring your firearms in. You'd make an appointment. We don't want it would be unsafe, I think, for people to just walk into a gun shop with a couple boxes of firearms and unannounced. So please call the storage location, make an appointment. And what they'll do is provide you a contract so that that your firearms are being professionally stored. It'll outline the details. There is a low fee for storage. And we do that in a way that we don't ever want to single out, like, oh, well, if this person is struggling with a mental health concern, it's free. But if this person's just moving to another place and they don't want their firearms on a moving truck, so like nothing like that. We want there to be that level of anonymity, but it's an affordable rate. And so you would fill out that contract. And then when you feel like everything is fine, the things that you're managing or taking care of, remember this is a voluntary service, then you can come and pick up your firearm. We have to follow all of the federal, state, and local laws for this. Again, we're operating in a regulated space. So if you're storing a completed firearm that is serialized, then you do have to go through the 4473 form, which attests that you are lawfully able to possess a firearm, and you have to pass that NICS background check. That being said, if you were storing a non-serialized critical part, such as a barrel or a firing pin, that is an option as well, perhaps for people who have privately manufactured firearms even and want to have space from that. If the state has any things like a waiting period or something like that, that does come into play. However, it is so important to have this option, because if a person doesn't have a place to store a firearm, and they do find themselves in a difficult situation, the amount of legal fees that come into play, and all of that to get your firearms back if you have let that situation escalate, um, the the waiting period, which again is an infringement, I want to be very clear about that,
Agreed.
just pales in comparison to what can happen if a person does not manage their personal matters and that outside intervention happens. So again, our goal really is to save lives, protect property, and preserve rights, and we have to do that within a certain framework, working with our FFL partners.
Walk us through how you select a location. Let's say you're looking for, a location near City Z. Do you reach out to them? Do the shops come to you? And how does that vetting process work for you?
So far, the shops have reached out to us, but as we grow, then we're going to start looking into areas where we don't have locations yet. It is incredibly important to us that we work with gun shops that are retail locations. So it's not just operating out of someone's home, and that they have positive ratings. I don't want to send someone who might be in crisis to a 1-star rated location that says, I wish I could give this 0 stars, they're terrible. Like, we really want to have a high emphasis on customer service. We also look to see if they're involved with their community. I love it when gun shops are like, hey, we're sponsoring the local little league and things like that. We want to know that they actually care about their communities. And the other thing that we look at are what are some of the touch points in the community where there can be some mutual referrals. Suicide prevention is something that has to be approached in a multifaceted way. And so, for example, let's say there's someone who we had a situation where a veteran was being evicted from his apartment, and so in that case, he could not take firearms into a homeless shelter, and so we were able to coordinate some storage for him. And in a situation like that, it's helpful to say, okay, well, where are the local places that might be able to provide financial support to veterans or housing or things like that. So whenever we look at a location, we also look to see what support services, community-based especially, are around. And then we try to help to connect those dots. And that way, if someone is at the gun shop and they mention like, hey, I just lost my job, then that gun shop can say, all right, well, did you know that there's this place that will help you create a resume, and there's a job fair coming up and things like that. So it is a way that really we can work within the firearms community to set up that gun shop as a trusted resource, and to just kind of be that hub for people that they can get information that is pertinent to them and that can really ultimately help save their life.
So sounds like it's a very holistic approach. You're not just dealing with the one thing, just the firearm, because that's just one facet of a situation somebody could find themselves in. That's very interesting.
It is, and I think that's really what sets us apart. I think that a moment ago you were talking about how there are other, I guess, organizations in this space that are really hyper focused on firearms, and they take a legislative approach to answering these questions and concerns. And so it is extremely important to us that we look at the bigger picture and at the person, and provide this option for people in a way that promotes self-governance and self-determination. And one of the ways that we do that is that we've created a personal safety plan that we make sure that in that safety plan, it's like, well, what are the things that I need if I'm having a bad day? Who are the friends that I can call? What are the numbers of my doctors and my pastor and my battle buddy, and down that list, who are the people that I can trust? And then there is a place on there for lethal means, not just firearms, but also medication, sharp objects, household objects, that kind of a thing. And so it's very important. Earlier you were saying, like, no one really knows when something is going to happen, when something goes sideways. And if you think that it's not going to happen to you, you might get a rude awakening. And that's why it's so important to plan ahead with that personal safety plan. And I would take it a step further, which is something I emphasized at the USTCA Expo when I taught there in October, that if we ignore this and we do not have a plan, it's actually a blind spot. It is a safety blind spot. Because if you find yourself in crisis and you do not have a plan, your chances of outside intervention, which escalate your chances for losing your firearms and losing your rights, are much higher than if you do have a plan in place.
John and I, unfortunately, on the badge cam videos we do on the main ASP channel, all too often, people get into a spot and they have a loved one, for example, a child or a parent who is now at the moment of actively wanting to kill themselves, and they will frequently use a firearm or a knife or something to get the police to do that for them, which is just awful in all the way around. It's awful for everyone involved. So talk to us about, if let's say, let's just use me as an example. Let's say I have a child who I feel like is in a bad spot. I could still use this service, right? It doesn't have to be me.
Exactly. And that is really important to remember, because sometimes it's not the gun owner who is in crisis, but it is someone in their home. It could be a teenager. It could be a spouse who's suffering from postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm.
And men suffer from postpartum depression too. There's a lot of changes in a household that happen that affect men. Before I founded Hold My Guns, I was a doula and childbirth educator for 11 years. And I had a doula client who was suffering from postpartum depression. And on a good day, she was totally fine to be around firearms. But on that particular day, she called and said, "Sarah, I have the gun safe open and I just can't do this anymore." And I said, how about you put down that firearm and I will be right over. And I called a trusted friend, and we went over, unloaded her firearm, gave her husband a call. We put it in a secure location, brought over a meal, watched her children, said, "Go take a shower. It's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. We're here to support you." And she's still with us. And I think a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, this isn't going to happen to us. Everybody's stable here." But really, there are life situations that come up. In this particular case, a baby that had reflux, that wasn't sleeping, maybe 2 or 3 more toddlers. I can't remember exactly how many children she had, but she had young children. And I know what that's like as a mom of 5. But lack of sleep and just feeling exhausted and like, I can't do this anymore. And those scenarios can happen to anyone. So yes, I love your point that it might not be the gun owner, but yet, as heads of households, as adults in the household, we need to have a plan just in case someone in our household is struggling.
And I sadly speak from experience. If you have a loved one who is indicating or threatening that they want to harm themselves or kill themselves, you need to take that seriously, because I think a lot of times you'll have someone who might kind of cry wolf a few times and you're like, you said that before, whatever. You need to take that very, very seriously. I lost my oldest brother years ago to suicide, and it wasn't the first time he'd attempted it even. So it's one of those things within a family that people don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk to someone outside the family. They think it's shameful, or it's there's some sort of stigma to it. Trust me when I tell you, if someone in your family is in that position, you need to take them seriously, even if it's not the first time they've said it or they've indicated it. And B, you need to get help, because if you're not a mental health professional, you don't have the skills, you don't have the toolkit to deal with what they're going through. Obviously, you can be there. You can, like you said with your friend, you can do everything that you can do, and that's to be applauded. But you really need to seek the help of a mental health professional at a time like that. When someone drops guns off for whatever reason, let's say they are having a moment of crisis and they're like, "I need to get the guns out of my house. I don't trust myself right now." When they drop these off, they may be wondering, are their records kept? If I have a background clearance, for my job, is this going to come up? Are these records available to a mortgage lender or to law enforcement or anyone else? Talk to us about that. How does that work, and do people need to be concerned in that area?
I love that you're asking that question, because it always scares me when people just like, oh, wow, great, hold your guns. That's, yeah, that's a great idea. But they don't ask those hard questions like that. And privacy is really important. So, first of all, Hold My Guns as an organization does not have access to the like information about the firearms that are being stored. All of that is kept in house with our FFL partners. The information is logged into, and by that information, I mean make, model, serial number, and the owner's name, is logged into the acquisition and disposition logbook, which is basically like an inventory logbook that FFLs are required by law to keep. That logbook does not have any information about why that person is storing a firearm. And it's very important that we don't ask. We assume that for whatever reason they're storing a firearm, whether it's for suicide prevention or because that individual is going on deployment, that it's preventing unauthorized access to that firearm. And that is what saved lives. So we do not ask that. And then we take it a step further. And in our contract, we also have that if a person were to, if there were a court order that would, like a warrant, that book would have to, be viewed in some kind of court-related case. We have a requirement that there's a petition for the private information of that individual to be sealed. So that is an extra step that we take. But it was important to me and for our entire team that we created a service that protected privacy. And again, we have to go within the working within a regulated space. So it does have to go in that A&D logbook. But the information that is put in there is the same kind of information that you would see. We use the consignment return process as the backbone of what we do, but it's the same kind of information as any other firearms transfer. So so if people are concerned about that, it would be like, which, they should be, you should always know who has access to my information. It is equivalent to any firearms transfer that you would do in a gun shop. And again, if you're storing a non-serialized critical part, the laws are different for that. Our service is not for someone who is prohibited. So if someone has, for example, a protection from abuse order against them or something like that, they would not be able to pass that background check. And so just bear that in mind for states that have different reporting and what constitutes for a prohibited person.
You've had some recent success stories. Is there any way you can share some of those, a story like that with us without obviously giving anyone's information? Is there, could you run us through like something that happened recently that went really well?
Yes, and actually, I can share a person's name because they went on a podcast and shared the story. So it is, you can find the link to that podcast in our executive summary, which is in the bios for all of our social media. But her name was Autumn, and she's still with us as far as I know. And I haven't talked to her in a little while, but she was a firearms instructor and a gun owner, and she had young children, and some of them were on the autism spectrum. And during the beginning of the pandemic, she lost her in-home care, and that caregiver would do things like help to, during meal times with feeding children or getting them dressed or that kind of a thing. And that in-home care went away because they weren't doing in-home visits. And according to what Autumn shared in the podcast, she started drinking and she had to quit work in order to take care of her children without having that in-home aid. And it just became very overwhelming. And so she called me one night and did not share any of those details. Again, she shared them after the fact. But she just said, I really need a place to store my firearm. And so we were able to find an FFL near her, and she was able to take her firearm there and store it and then get the help that she needed. So we're just really grateful that she was willing to come forward. But I just can't imagine, just to be blindsided that you have, consistent care over time. And then all of a sudden that care goes away and you love your children very much. but you don't have the support. And this is the kind of scenario that, to some extent, all of us have probably experienced in one way or another, in the past, really almost 2 years now. So it's just, again, you never know what is going to happen, but to have a plan to say, okay, I'm not doing well right now. I am tempted for self harm or to take my own life. Um, that it's like, okay, I'm recognizing these warning signs. What can I do to get help? And she did. So we're really grateful for that. And then we found out yesterday that someone brought in firearms to store at our Louisiana location. So again, we're really just grateful that this service is available to support our beloved firearms community, and we are happy to help.
So I think it's important to reiterate a couple things. One, if someone is in a place of crisis and they tell you that, take them seriously. If
Mm-hmm.
you are in a bad spot, if you're having bad thoughts, if you are considering harming yourself, killing yourself, just reach out to somebody, anybody. If you're listening to this right now and you're listening to this because you're in this position, it gets better. It will get better. You need to believe that, and you need to reach out to someone who can give you a little bit of help. Sarah, tell me, is there any part of the country where you are looking for locations, where you are bereft of locations, a particular state or metropolitan area you want to mention?
Our goal is to have storage locations in all 50 states. I have to say that in Texas right now, we have had multiple requests for a location, and we don't have one there. And particularly in Harris County, they lose a veteran every 6 days, one every 6 days to suicide. And I believe it's 80% of the time it's with a firearm. So we've been looking for a location there. And again, that location needs to be one that is a retail location and has great customer service and really has a heart for supporting our firearms community. So we're hopeful that one will surface that we'll be able to work with. But that is an area where we would really appreciate having a location. And then we've also been working with San Diego gun owners, and Gun Owners Radio recently went on there, and they have a number of gun shops that are interested in working with us because there is a need, especially in California, where there's a concern about things like red flag laws that gun owners they might be avoiding getting help because they're so concerned that they might lose their rights and they might lose their firearms. So especially in areas where there are red flag laws, there is a cry for help. Can we please have a storage location so that we can privately take care of these matters and not get caught up in outside intervention where we lose our rights?
So if there's a gun store owner listening to this and they want to volunteer their services, how would they do that?
Please get a hold of us. You can go to our website, and there's a contact form on there, and fill out the form for being an interested FFL partner and ask questions about your location and about your community involvement. And that really just helps us to learn more about your FFL and why you're interested in working with us. And it's just exciting that gun shops are interested in helping with us. So I really, again, Mike, just thank you for putting that call out there. And really, the more we can grow across the United States, people don't have to worry about crossing state lines and, worrying about, oh, wow, well, is my magazine capacity more than what the state kid is, I'm allowed to carry here.
Right.
And we don't ever want to have those obstacles. So the more locations we have, the better.
Is there anything else that you wanted to cover that maybe I didn't ask you about?
In addition to firearm storage, we have an opportunity to work through our gun shop partners to really uplift our firearms community. Growing up, I was on welfare for a while. Our family was. My dad was unemployed for several years during like the whole Y2K crisis, and so we had the experience, which I'm very grateful for because it was very eye-opening to me, at how a lot of community related services they treat people who are already very down and out in a very shaming kind of way.
Yep.
And I realized, as a range safety officer and as one who's attended many classes in gun shops, that gun shop partners, they have classrooms, and we have an opportunity to bring uplifting workshops in a stigma-free environment. And so, for example, how cool would it be to to have maybe a blood drive at a local gun shop, or to have a workshop that empowers service members who are reacclimating after being away on deployment, or sending care packages out to people who are deployed, or Valentine's cards to a local retirement community. And we have an opportunity to come together as a firearms community through our local gun shop to have some community service opportunities like that. Another option or opportunity might be, sponsoring a team for tactical games, or for Go Ruck or something like that. And what that does, again, just highlighting that holistic approach, is that it brings our firearms community together in a way that creates shoulder to shoulder relationships. Like, it might be embarrassing to go to therapy or counseling initially, right? Like, but to be able to say, hey, I just volunteered with my friends that I go to the range with, and we just did this great thing in our community, and we were talking about what's going on in our lives while we worked, and then we got a free range coupon when we're done, and we got to shoot together. And what that does is then creates it uplifts that protective factor of getting to know people with the same kind of values, and it provides an opportunity for our firearms community to really, to make a difference, and using those gun shop partners as a way to do that. So that's an exciting thing that we're doing through our gun shop partners, that I think is really worthy of noting, that it's not simply firearm storage, but it is creating a community that truly gets to the heart of suicide prevention, and it creates a life that you want to live. And it also underscores the beauty of liberty that we want for people. Just like when you go into SHOT Show, like, you're like, wow, this feels like home. These are my people. This is beautiful. And that same kind of feeling I feel when I walk into my local gun shop. And that feeling is one that makes me want to just get up in the morning, because I know if I'm having a bad day, I can go to the range and meet up with my friends there, or see people I care about who work at that shop, and that makes me smile. So that is the bigger picture of what we do, and also preserving rights. I think it's important to emphasize that as well. We are, whenever we can help people and support their personal agency in their informed decision making process by providing this option for people, we are helping to preserve rights. We're making sure that they have an option where they're not just going to be along for the ride, but that they have a say for what will happen with their firearms, and what kind of care would work best for them.
Folks, don't forget to stick around after this for our interview with Steve Gutowski of thereload.com. Our guest is the founder and executive director of holdmyguns.org. Her name is Sarah Albrecht. See, Neil, that wasn't so hard to say. We appreciate you being on, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here, and blessings on you and your endeavor, and I hope it just continues to grow and flourish.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, folks, you know what time it is. It's time for the Gutowski Files, starring our very own Stephen Gutowski. He is the founder of thereload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. He also has a YouTube channel by the same name. Stephen, thank you for being on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I feel like I want to make that same star joke again.
Absolutely.
Star,
from last week? No.
Very flattered.
Yeah. Anyway, so this week we are talking about something that, again, this is why we need folks to go over to the Reload and get a membership, because Stephen's covering things that I haven't heard this anywhere else. I'm sure someone else is covering it, but I hadn't heard about it. The city of San Jose passed, I guess they call it an ordinance, a city ordinance or a city law. It requires people buying guns to have gun insurance. The National Association for Gun Rights has filed a suit in federal court to get rid of this ridiculous law because it's obviously unconstitutional to the casual observer. And Stephen, am I correct in saying they can, if you fail to get this insurance, they can take your gun? I'm not overstating that, am I?
No, that's correct. And it's actually not just insurance. It's also there's tax basically on just gun ownership. If you own a gun, you have to pay an annual tax, or they're calling it a fee because uh, there's some issues with issuing new taxes on property in California. You have to go through a certain process that they didn't go through, so they're calling this a fee instead. But yeah, if you don't pay the fee and you don't obtain the insurance, which is insurance that doesn't actually exist, by the way. I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but you can't buy insurance to protect you from negligent discharges in your homeowner's policy, as far as I'm aware. This is actually a big point of contention during the council meeting. Although oddly, a lot of people who brought this up as like, "Hey, I talked to the insurance companies and they don't issue this kind of insurance
There's no such thing.
that we're requiring."
Yeah.
A lot of those people still voted for the requirement anyway. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on with that, but yeah, that if you don't comply, you can have your guns seized under this ordinance. Absolutely.
I mean, I guess you'd have to ask the question: who is this law aimed at exactly? How is this? Give them all the benefit of the doubt. The people that passed this law and wrote it. Who exactly do they think is going to be paying the $25 tax or whatever it is and the insurance? And I guess the bottom line is this preventing any gun crimes? Is this preventing any sort of irresponsible gun use? I mean, I can't imagine how they would think that's even remotely possible.
No, I don't, and I don't think that they really argue it would prevent crime. Their argument is more along the lines of gun owners should have to pay for the damage inflicted on the community by gun violence or accidental shootings. And so they are imposing this tax or fee, depending on your point of view, which will then go to fund a nonprofit that they're going to create, which will provide services to people who've been injured by, gunfire, or provide gun safety training. This is all theoretical. They haven't actually created any of this yet.
Right.
This is what it's supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the insurance policy, I guess they kind of, from the point of view of the mayor who's supported this, and the city council members who voted for it, and they're all Democrats, obviously, out in San Jose, California. But their point of view, they sort of view the insurance requirement as akin to a car insurance requirement, where if you get in an accident, if you're at fault in an accident, your insurance will at least pay for the damage that you inflict on someone else. I guess that's the basic concept at the center of this idea. That's how they view it.
I view it as another hoop they want people to jump through. Honestly, who most needs a firearm on them? People who walk around Silicon Valley, or people who are going to and from their small business, people who are not making that much money, to whom a $25 or $50 additional burden on top of the amount of money it takes to get a CCW in the state of California, if you can get one, on top of the money it costs to buy a gun and to buy ammunition,
Mm-hmm.
$25 to $50 makes a difference to some people. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I just don't think either they don't care or they didn't take that into consideration. One of the
Well, and this is specifically for just owning a gun inside your own home, not even for carrying it. Obviously the fees for the training and permit, if you could get one, which in California is extremely difficult to do, are on top of this is just for ownership. Just to own a gun, you have to pay this fee and get this insurance. They did set up a waiver system for people who can't afford to pay the tax. So that they did have some consideration for poor folks, although obviously to get the waiver, you'd have to go through presumably an application process. So you have to go to the city government and go through the process to prove that you can't pay that. And obviously that in and of itself is a time tax, which for people who don't make a lot of money, they tend not to have a lot of time to do these sorts of things.
Working
either.
3 jobs, trying
they're
to
working
figure out
people,
childcare. Yeah. And going back to what you said earlier, their analogy to car insurance doesn't hold water for a half a second. There's no constitutional right to drive a car. There is a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. if somebody tried to impose a tax or a fee or a requirement for insurance on your First Amendment rights, on your Fifth Amendment rights, on any other any other amendment to the Constitution, everybody would be up in arms, as they should be. It's just they just keep trying to whittle away, and I'm very glad that the National Association for Gun Rights has filed suit, and I guess some others are considering filing suit as well.
Yeah. So there's some disagreement over the best path of challenging this in court. Technically, it hasn't gone into effect yet, right? It won't go into effect until they get through some procedural steps later on, and that'll take a couple months. And so some of the other gun rights groups, like the bigger ones that you've probably heard of before, like the NRA, the Second Amendment Foundation, the Firearms Policy Coalition, they're planning to file suit as well, but not until later on down the line, when it sort of they believe it would be a better strategy to challenge at that point, once it's goes, because you have to be able to prove that you're being harmed before you can
Sure.
Sue over something in court. But so there, it's sort of a disagreement over legal strategy right now. But I think certainly, to your point about this earlier, this is going to have a hard time of winning in court. San Jose is going to have a very tough time convincing federal courts that this is constitutional. And then I think it'll probably have a hard time in state court as well, because of the issue with approving a property tax, which is effectively what this is, without going through the necessary requirements that actually are part of the state constitution in California.
Right.
Were approved by a ballot measure back in, I think, 2010. You have to meet a certain threshold in order to impose new property taxes. I think it actually has to be a vote by the residents of the area. So that obviously didn't happen in this case. The mayor and the city council contend that this is a fee, not a tax. So there's going to be there's certain to be a lot of legal fighting over that issue. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether this flames out immediately or whether it holds on long enough to make it to something like the Supreme Court, where it could be a significant legal case, because it kind of attacks the very heart of Heller, the landmark Supreme Court decision that said, you have an individual right to own a handgun inside your own home, was really the core
right.
of Heller. And so there haven't been a lot of attempts to try and restrict that through through outright bans or through taxing and insurance requirements like what San Jose is doing. And so it'll be interesting to see how long this actually lasts in court and how long San Jose is willing to try and defend it.
Right.
Because you've seen some pretty radical stuff come out of California cities and other cities. But one example that comes to mind for me is Los Angeles and San Francisco tried to ban anyone who was an NRA member from doing business with the city. And that didn't last long. That was something that they passed. I believe San Francisco actually passed the ordinance, and then it got sued immediately and they lost immediately, and then gave up on trying to fight it.
That's freedom of association. That's not, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's the major difference, is that it implicates the First Amendment primarily. And so the courts might be more willing to defend it. But, the Ninth Circuit has traditionally upheld pretty much every gun restriction that's come before it. So, does San Jose fight this all the way there? And then if they win, will the Supreme Court take up this case and rule against San Jose, which I think probably would be the outcome. But the basic point is, like, this is probably going to end one of two ways from my point of view here. And that's either it'll immediately get tossed and they're not going to bother trying to fight that, or it could end up going all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is one or the other. Either they're dedicated to this concept or they're not. I almost hope they fight it, to be honest with you, because if it does make it to the Supreme Court, I think it's a pretty open and shut, clear.
It does seem
case.
that way,
yeah.
Especially with the makeup of the Supreme Court, and especially with the oral arguments in the gun carry case that's going on right now out of New York, where you saw even Chief Justice Roberts was skeptical of the idea of requiring a permit for gun carry, let alone for just simple ownership inside your home. And so like putting those sorts of restrictions, like you said earlier, it's akin to, it's really quite broad, because this is pretty, it's akin to charging someone an annual fee and requiring them to get libel insurance in order to publish anything in public or go to a protest, right? That would be sort of the similar concept in the First Amendment realm. And that's obviously probably not something that would ever stand up in court. And so I doubt it would stand up here in this situation either.
Yeah, imagine if you were required to pay a fee, quote unquote, a fee, and get insurance for your religious activities because someone might hear something you said from the pulpit and go do something crazy, and therefore we need a fee from you to create a fund for the potential victims. It's just ridiculous on its face.
Yeah, you could see this being applied, misinformation and hate speech, right? Those are bad things. Everyone disagrees with them, depending on your definition, of course, but is nobody likes neo-Nazis or whatever. And so or people who lie about the vaccines or what have you, right? Or guns or whatever. And so maybe we should require everyone to carry a special kind of insurance to ensure that they are less likely to lie in public or to say racist, horrible things, right? That's basically the same concept here. And I think we would all understand that wouldn't survive a court challenge very long.
I mean, I'm a free speech absolutist. I think everyone should say everything they want to say as long as it doesn't incite violence against someone else. I want everyone to get their opinion out there, and we can judge for ourselves, the relative merit of those opinions. And when it comes to the Second Amendment, it's really just a question of, will my flamethrower print underneath my Hawaiian shirt, as is the big question for me, or will I find parking at the mall for my M1 Abrams tank? Stephen, thank you so much for being on. Folks, if you're lamenting the lack of down-the-middle, sane, sober reporting on the Second Amendment and all things firearm-related, I beseech ye to go to thereload.com and consider getting a membership. Stephen relies on his members for all of his funding. Therefore, he's beholden to no one and no entity, no company, no organization, which is why he has the freedom to do the things he is doing. Thereload.com, the Weekly Reload podcast. Stephen Gutowski, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.